Well, we can start at the beginning, right? Because when we watch, if everybody's watched our first episode, where Jordan and I were really, I mean, we're still infants in this podcasting game. You know, we're still just getting our feet wet when it comes to the know-how, right? But at the same time, it's been a while since that first episode. I want to say about a year and some months now. But when we did that first episode, one thing we discussed right away was what we want to accomplish with the podcast. And I think in the overall sense, maybe I'll speak my piece first and then you can take over. Is I think for the overall concept, it's remained the same, like with a single point of view. When people hear the name, I think the first thing they'll think of is, you know, Singapore, or maybe just the island itself, whatever preconceived notions they have about Singapore. But the goal was to have different point of views related to Singapore. And as we've consistently grown and discussed this more and built on this idea, one thing we've realized is that sometimes you don't have to have lived in Singapore or worked in Singapore or be from Singapore or visited to have an opinion on Singapore. There's a lot of people that have never touched this island that have something to say. And I would say there's probably more people that have not touched this island that have something to say about Singapore, right? So even getting that perspective is, in our opinion, important. What do people think of this country and how things work around here when they haven't been here, based on social media or whatever it may be? So that idea has slowly grown into not necessarily just who's here, but who can add insight into what the thought process is about here. And I think that I think is a great distinction. But moving past that, as we've gone our separate ways as far as locationally, one thing that we've run into, and this is a transparent episode, that's why we wanted to return and be honest with everybody, with all in good taste. But as we've gone our separate ways, one of the biggest blockages that we've run into has been time management when it comes to both of our time schedules, right? Not necessarily the management of our own schedule, but how it can integrate with his, and he can integrate with mine, and we can integrate with the guest and plan something that makes sense for all these different time zones, especially if there's a third time zone involved with the guest. And trying to manage that and juggle that has been tough, but at the same time, I think we've made it tougher on ourselves by trying to stay really rigid with how we run the podcast. And it goes back to what Jordan was saying earlier, which is we have to enjoy this and find, you know, what works for us. We can't try and find somebody else's cookie cutter, you know, system, whatever works for them.
Good point.
And it works for them, and that's because it's them, you know, and we have to figure out what works for us. And one thing we discussed was there's going to be times where he's going to run an episode without me, or I'm going to run an episode without him based on the circumstances, right? And it's not always because of, you know, oh, we can't find the right time to do it. Sure, there's going to be moments where that happens. As I go into games, Jordan goes into games or a season, which we'll touch on. That's going to happen. But there's also just times where, you know, Jordan may have such a good relationship with this person. It would be nice to have a one-on-one conversation with that person, really sit down, powwow, have that, you know, having that rapport with somebody is so important that even if I'm just a fly on the wall adding into the group, sometimes it changes that dynamic of that convo. So what we want to do is make sure that everything is always in the most complete way, a friendly conversation. It's not an interview. It's not a quiz. It's a conversation with people that we either want to get to know, already know, or whatever it may be, right?